But you started looking at the demographics, and it was the only demographics for the state troopers, right? And then you take into account the local county police departments, or even like bully state municipalities. It was disproportionately affecting people of color. And I started asking the police officers, how in the world is it that we're in Hartford County, where the population, minority population is probably less than 5%, I would think, but the people getting tickets are like 20%, 25%. So you start to think about it. So I bring that up to say, I like being in state General Assembly because we make a difference. And little things like that you think about, why does it matter? It's because it can change your life, it can change our lives, it can change a lot of people's lives. And so, when I say that, although it was very small, it took them 3 years to pass that piece of legislation. People, and quite honestly, and some people thought, the police said they need it, let them have it, right? Let them have that tool to enforce our laws. That's, in a nutshell, that's one of the things we do. We obviously deal with the budget, and then I think you were talking about the HBCU lawsuit that occurred here with disproportionately the inequalities of the funding and the programs that go to working black colleges like Blue State. And the case you're talking about is the one that's actually a case that we've been hearing a lot of legislation for the past several years, because there was a state senator from Baltimore City who was upset that Towson had created a master's program that duplicated the programs, the program at Morgan State. And long story short, she kept saying, look, it's not fair because you're taking resources, you're taking students, there's no need for it, right? Aside from, what we've been finding out, the HBCUs here in the state of Maryland, and probably throughout the United States, are probably being funded the way they should be. And we pride ourselves here in the state of Maryland for having a strong public school system and university and colleges. And so, I know I was catching up on some of the reading on some of the opinion that came out. And have you read it? Have you read the latest opinion? So you realize that there's going to be a mediator that's going to decide, how to bring the inequalities back, and make them more fair. Believe it or not, it sounds like, well, why do we need to wait a year, right? Yeah. But it's unfortunately in life, you'll find out that people fight for many things in life, and sometimes a year sounds like a lot, but it's not a whole lot. And I'm glad that at least it's moving forward. I wish that we could have done something several years ago when this issue came up.
So the question is why would we have to wait until the court acts? I mean, the state government is the body that funds the Maryland State Higher Education Commission, which is responsible for determining how much money goes to what school. I mean, so, as a member of the state Senate, you have the power right now to do something about that.
And we do. Unfortunately, it takes more than one, more than two, more than five. So there's 40, just to give you an example, there's 47 state senators. And each of us, there's technically about 8 people that represent Prince George's County. I think that if I was a betting person, we would be on board, probably Baltimore City would be on board. It's just trying to get to number 24 to say, because you have people who live in Baltimore County and surrounding areas and other areas who are going to point to say, anytime you want to delay something, this, Professor, you can say, well, let the courts, they have spoken on it, let's wait a year, see what they come up with, and if we don't decide that it's fair, then we can take action. Not that I don't agree with it, but that's, to get to your question, the answer is, because we live in a very diverse state. And so Prince George's County is very diverse, Montgomery County is very diverse, Baltimore City is very diverse. Quite honestly, once you get out of those areas, it's very not diverse. And people have a different point of view, just like the United States, right? You have pockets that are very diverse, and then you have the Midwest and so forth. And just like in Congress, those folks also have a vote. And they're probably gonna argue that, we don't see anything wrong with duplicating it. So we go back and forth. not to make, I always tell people not to make an excuse, but the reality is that it's been a very tough battle, and we've taken it on the Senate floor, and it's.
So would you be open to supporting legislation right now to end discrimination? Because I don't understand why anybody, whether you live in Western Maryland or whether you live in Baltimore, can see the reason why it's just to fund, again, the University of Maryland per student, not, again, in terms of, because again, they got more students, they get more money, right? But per student, what is the justification for funding University of Maryland College Park? Let's say $20,000 per student, and funding, Bowie State $10,000 per student.
No, of course. I'm in favor of making sure that schools like Bowie State and Morgan State and Coppin State, I don't think Coppin State's in the university.
Yeah.
It's a university system.
Mm-hmm.
I know they're historic black colleges.
No, they are. Coppin is a part of the lawsuit.
It's Coppin up part of this law. So I know that there's different fundings that I think Coppin, I think it might be Morgan has a different.
So Morgan, Coppin, which students were there?
Maryland Eastern Shore.
Maryland, UMES,
and
Bowie State, so it's 5.
Yeah, so.
Yeah. So okay, let's go to the next case.
So just to answer your question, of course, I gotta think. Look, we want to make sure that everybody's receiving not just a fair, but equal. We want to make sure that everybody's receiving a equal and fair education, and part of it has to do with resources. Part of it is that we need to have, what they say, make sure that our professors are being compensated, make sure you're receiving the best education possible, that you're in buildings and facilities that meet the requirements of, the likes of University of Maryland. And, quite honestly, that's a different, University of Maryland is just kind of a different animal in itself. But you're right. What's fair is fair because we're all paying taxes here, and it shouldn't matter whether you're at Bowie State, Frostburg State, or University of Maryland. It should be the same at each college and university. Sure. So yes, Professor, I think that there's a problem. I think the good thing is that I think the courts have spoken that they have found that there's something very wrong with the way we're treating HBCUs, and I think that if I was, again, I have a feeling that someone's going to say, look, exactly what you're saying, why are we going to wait? Let's start working on it in case they don't have, in a year from now, if they can't come up with a system to where we find that it's satisfactory, we should have something in place. Yeah. So I think that's something, and that's something I would support. And quite honestly, that's something that, that I would talk to Senator Jones Party Conway, which is, she's the one who from the initial issue was the duplication of the master's program at Towson from Morgan State, which she found very troubling because she represents the area in Morgan State.
So let me ask you, as state's attorney, I know you're responsible for prosecuting criminal violations, but what is your role with respect to civil rights? If you were to be elected, what is your responsibility for protecting people's civil rights?
Well, I think it's, we have a great responsibility. I think state's attorney, I think it's one of those positions that for the most part, people view it as when you violated, you've committed a crime, and you decide whether to prosecute someone or not to prosecute it, or how to prosecute it. I think that there is an opportunity to possibly expand your role as a state's attorney for possibly civil rights violations. Although I guess technically that's Attorney General who looks into the civil side of it, but I don't think it would prevent us from investigating, especially if we feel that something's intentionally being done to a particular.
So again, this is a civil rights violation, basically. So what we're saying, what title, Ms. Sameh? Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. So would you be again committed to advocating on behalf of the students and the alumni and the faculty of this university?
Yeah, of course. But it's a civil.
Right, and that's my question.
So the state's attorney technically deals with criminal. But yes, I think that one of the things that I think the state's attorney's office can be helpful is gathering information and gathering evidence, gathering testimony, and presenting it to the Attorney General of State on behalf of the students at, for example, Bowie State, which falls in Prince George's County, this is the information we've gathered and to help advocate for it in that aspect. And if not, then, you know, pass it on to, you know, hopefully the Attorney General, I think he would take it upon himself to look at some of the, in particular in matters like this, to really investigate. And I think that's part of what's going through now. But, you know,
because I don't understand why the Attorney General is defending the Maryland Commission hiring, because it's non-defensible. I mean, why? I mean, I know technically you're supposed to. I mean, but again, that's another question. Because, like, you know, you all could basically defund the defense of that whole case. And so, I mean, just saying, throwing out in terms of the possibility.
Right.
But I don't. Again, we had two cases, so I want to go to the second.
No, of course. And you know, technically, what's going on with the HBCUs, it's certainly a civil rights matter. So it doesn't fall into the purview of the state's attorney. But, you know, as state's attorney, we have a voice. We can say, we can certainly advocate and express our concerns to say, you know, we find that it's something very wrong and that the Attorney General should take a position or take not a position. And that's something to also be discussed with, and I'm sure there will be other people who are probably not on the same side that you and I are on and say the Attorney General has a responsibility to defend a department that's being, you know, that's being sued from the private sector. So
second question, which actually relates to the first, and that is the case of Maryland v. Sean Urbanski. I mean, if we did an interesting mock trial days ago in which not only Mr. Urbanski was being prosecuted, but also the state of Maryland, I mean, also the University of Maryland College Park was being investigated on the theory of what? The doctrine of what? Corporate responsibility, corporate criminal responsibility.
Yes.
For basically one, you know, almost kind of turning a blind eye towards the type of discriminatory conduct that was taking place and that is taking place on its campus, and so we had an interesting kind of scenario that tied into that case, and so, you know, my question to you is,
what is the scenario that you use for
this is the case of Lieutenant Richard Collins.
No, I know that.
And so the idea is that the argument is that a hate crime was committed by Sean Urbanski, right? So we want to hear your views on that particular crime. But the question is again, the University of Maryland, which ties into our first case, you know, is basically an environment that's not diverse. It doesn't reflect the diversity of its own state. Not even a city that houses it. You know, the population, for example, the African American population of College Park is somewhere in the neighborhood of at least, you know, 40%.
Right.
But the population of students on the campus of University of Maryland College Park is what percentage, Mr. Green? 13%. So again, and that on top of, again, the lack of diversity, particularly with respect to African Americans in its leadership, its faculty, and again responding to, you know, things that even before the killing were discriminatory towards, again, African American students in particular, as well as the Latino students for that matter. So the question is what would your office do to, one, in terms of the prosecution of Mr. Urbanski, which would be directly under your jurisdiction, and then two, what would it do to, again, protect and prevent such actions from happening again?
So, thank you so much. And you know, I remember when the incident occurred, and I thought to myself, you know, even after the preliminary investigation came out, you know, why wasn't it being treated as an enhanced penalty of a hate crime, which is an additional 20 years? And I was, to be honest with you, I didn't understand at the time, and I'm glad that eventually, as you know, the current state's attorney started looking into the case, we decided, okay, yes, we have a video, we have testimony, I don't know what this was, and this is one of the things that, quite honestly, in the Maryland General Assembly, we look at and say, we pass all these laws with these hands penalties, but no one's ever used them, right? Mm-hmm. And it is, I mean, you know, and time and time again, And we never understood that, and didn't quite understand it in this particular scenario. And I respect the state attorney there now, but I didn't quite understand it then, why she never said, you know what, who in the world is not going to look at this and think that there's a murder that occurred, first-degree murder. This person should be in jail for the rest of their life without ever coming out. But why? The least thing that can happen is that, okay, so you don't get them with the enhanced penalty, but you can help to push the conversation, right? And send a message, because if she wouldn't have done this, it's what else can you show to show that there was, this person intentionally did this because they didn't like the way this person looked, right? It was a hate crime. And, her excuse was, we don't know, we had let the evidence come out. Look, everybody, eventually the grand jury actually came back and said, yes, this is a hate crime. I don't know why she decided to wait. I think that, and I think that this gets to what you're saying. I think, the state's attorney's office, quite honestly, in my opinion, has become almost like a political position for something else. So people are a little bit kind of walking on eggshells sometimes because, they don't want to get it wrong, right? And you don't want to get it wrong when you're talking about people's liberties. But when you talk about a particular case like this, where there's so much evidence pointing to, and there was a video, there were eyewitnesses. It wasn't like there was there was he said, she said thing. But to me was, I think it should have been charged from after a few days of investigation. Obviously, you have to take the investigation, let it take its course. But just that individual probably shouldn't be, should be in jail for the rest of his life, right? But with the school, and and as things would come out, and I have enough friends, and my wife and friends of hers, and I know kids that go to University of Maryland. The University of Maryland has always had that struggle where how much the diversity that it accepts into its colleges and university, and eventually I think the school is at a point now where it unfortunately got to this point where someone had to die, and I don't know if they could have prevented it. Quite honestly, it's hard to say whether you can prevent something like this from occurring, but you can definitely take steps to send a message and deter people from ever thinking about this. And to get to what you're saying, Professor, as I've learned that the more diversity you're exposed to people who may not look like you and I, the more you're going to be able to learn. But if you're never exposed to it, and this is what we're talking about, exposing, white students to be around more diversity, and vice versa. I think we all learn from each other, right? I don't want to point Cody out, but Cody's definitely, he's from, from Virginia, and he's from a rural part, and we grew up probably very different. But being around each other, eventually you learn, you're like anybody. It's like any friends, you agree, and most times we agree, sometimes we disagree on whatever may be the topic of the day. But you learn, right? And I think that, if anything, that's what the injustice the University of Maryland is doing to its students, is exposing, other students to more diversity. Because eventually you graduate from school, right? But if you've never been, if all your classes are 90% white, right? For whatever it may be, or overwhelmingly, you're not going to interact with other folks. And you can't force people to, but if you create an atmosphere, a campus where you expose people to more diversity, whether it's a good or bad, you at least are starting to expose people, and you can change people's minds as to, I never thought about something this way. And that goes for all of us. And so for me, if there is something, I'm sure you studied this issue, whether the university should be held more accountable. Is it worth exploring? Yes. Can you get a conviction? That's a different thing, right? And you know this, and you learn about in life, and sometimes, and I don't know whether it's state's attorney, current state's attorney also works know, you know, this issue has been brought to her attention, but I mean, you have to say that it's, I hope that politics doesn't ever play a part. I don't think that it does completely, but I think that this is where the state's attorney's office has to be should be more independent than the politics in it. And, you know, and I don't know if we get to the point where you're like the FBI, but maybe you're to a certain point like that where there's a wall that, hey, if there's a case brought to you, I don't want any outside influence getting on me, because quite honestly, if you try to sue the University of Maryland, and I think that if there's enough evidence, and then I haven't done specific research as to what are the elements that need to be met, but I would say that, you know, you need to create that wall where the University of Maryland and all its funders aren't bugging the state's attorney's office, aren't influenced. And by influence, you can go on the internet now and start posting things about, you know, folks to deter people where, look, if you do this, there's, you know, because University of Maryland is not going to, you know, lay down and say, yes, we've done something wrong. They're going to say, you know, how could we approve? There's no way we could have prevented this. I could just imagine the things that they start coming up with. But it's interesting. I've never, you know, I would certainly look into it and ask questions about it. But I think the University of Maryland, if anything, should be held accountable. They need to start creating more. It's accepting more students, but, you know, but make the effort, right? Make the effort, and to say, whether it's going to Prince George Community College to say, and quite honestly, I think, look, and I'm not that much, I'm a little bit older than you guys, but I'm not that far removed from the college university, but you go where you feel comfortable, right? You want to be around where you feel comfortable. And if the University of Maryland's not making you feel comfortable, then you're not going to go there, right? You're going to go somewhere else. And I think that's the biggest effort that the University of Maryland can make right now at this point. Yes, I'm sorry, you had your hand.
Sorry. My question is, how can you not charge University of Maryland for for them being responsible? Because Sean Urbanski, he was a part of the hate group. Yeah, that group, they allowed that group to be a part of their campus. So how can you not charge them for being involved in that?
They allowed the group to be part of the campus, all right? I don't think that's fair. No, I
think
think he belonged to a hate group.
Facebook.
But he was going to school at University of Maryland.
But I thought it was a group of students from University of Maryland that's a part of that group.
Right. They were aware. Yeah. So the question in our fact pattern, particularly,
okay,
with the state of Maryland, I mean the University of Maryland, there's an argument, even factual, they should have been aware of the again the existence of this campus, a group called Alt-Right, which was again a Facebook group, but there were members of the student body who were part of that group, including Mr. Urbanski.
Right.
And so again, the question is, what is the responsibility? Again, on the doctrine of corporate responsibility, the criminal corporate responsibility. What would have been the responsible action by the University of Maryland College Park in that case? And maybe it could have been, again, creating a position of online social justice engagement to make sure, look around Facebook to make sure that groups like that are not operating, and if they are, because again there's a free speech, then to engage them so they can again try to create conversations with them to hopefully change some of the minds of the young people who might be engaged with those types of activities.
Can I ask you, what you brought up before I get to you, because I'm curious now. Under the doctrine of corporate responsibility, is there specific elements for the criminal activity? You have that? And if not, I'll get it from you, because I'm interested to see. I'm curious, because I'm sure. Yeah.
I do believe I read that it was there were like posters of discrimination on the campus, and I think they called it where like it was like a road for like men.
In the frat house.
Yeah.
I'll just repeat what you
Of
said.
course. I think that, so this is kind of the thing with some of the criminal laws. You guys, a lot of you gotta find the intent. And so technically we could all be in here, right? And some, some of us can go to a group and then we leave, right? And then two of us can go out and commit a crime, right? And the way that you try to be careful is that, okay, we may have all been gathered, right? But if two people decided upon themselves they were going to go commit a crime, should everybody else be held accountable, right? And I'm just giving you an example where you start to get into you got to start connecting the dots, right? Because criminal law is one of those things that you got to meet the elements.
The Senator, that one of the elements under the theory of corporate responsibility, the element of intent is met when, again, a corporate officer knew or should have known about, again, actions that were criminally, prosecutorial or prosecutable, right? And so in this case, again, if people are committing hate crimes on the campus, and then the hate crime led to an assault, and in this case, not only assault, but a murder, then there's an argument that can be made that, again, the mens rea, right, that we studied was established on the part of, again, the corporation itself. So that's the idea, but overall, I think you were addressing that.
No, of course, and that's why I'd be interested to see what the specific elements, and then this is the thing about as a professor about being an attorney. It's like you have the law, and you got to how do the facts connect to the law, right? And sometimes it looks like they do, sometimes they don't, and sometimes you look like they do. And that's where you got to be crafty about how do you collect information. This is where you start collecting information and start putting into your fact pattern and into the law. Now, I mean, you've obviously studied this, more of the case than I probably have.
Because if that person, Sean Urbanski, if he had attended Boone State University, who is majority African American, I don't think he will be a part of that group. But since he's there's a possibility that he probably wouldn't. Or say if it was mixed or more majority, like you have 25% of each, which you won't have that. But say if it was a majority Caucasian, he wouldn't feel entitled to be a part of that group and be okay a part of that group openly.
So that's.
He's talking about the co-chair of the school.
Yes.
The co-chair to be co-chair of the group.
Culture.
Okay.
Since it's like
so,
majority. Because I think he will probably do the same thing to Hispanics and Asians.
No, of course. Look, I think I don't think it's going to discriminate. I think, unfortunately, we still have folks that think this way. Probably more people than we think, right? Especially now with quite honest, with the administration that's in place right now, I think people feel emboldened to probably speak out more than they probably have in the past. I mean, that's my personal opinion. And but I think that getting back to holding the university accountable, and I would have to probably study a little bit more, but just to say that as attorneys, what we have to make sure is that before you go and file, you got to have everything in order, right? Yeah. And because so I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate. I think it's good. The university's going to say, well, are we supposed to check everybody's Facebook, all 25,000 students? And how often are we supposed to check their Facebook? How often are we supposed to keep track of their social media, right? And so, one of the things, and that's, I could envision someone saying that, right? Now, I would say this, that if you, and I don't know, and I think you know a little bit more than I do as far as, but if there's evidence saying, you know what, someone told the administration that this particular person, or he was associated with this group and they were planning to do something, and they ignored it, then I think that, now you start to get to it, right? Because they had a responsibility and they were put on notice. And like I said, I haven't, looked at the specific elements for this crime.
Yeah.
But, and this is why it's very important to gather, this is why it's very important to have detectives and very competent state's attorneys and police officers and law enforcement collecting evidence. This is why I think it's very important to have a wall between law enforcement and outside, because things can believe, just like you always read it, people are trying to influence from the outside in. I mean, University of Maryland, I'm sure right now, if someone probably sees us and reads this conversation, they're probably going to start looking at it, like, make sure that they're crossed their T's and dot their I's.
Yeah.
But, is there something worth exploring, or is there something worth looking and saying, changing policy at the University of Maryland, not just University of Maryland, but all our colleges and universities should start looking at people's social media, students, and if they see a red flag, you know what? They should probably investigate that more and start looking into things like that. Now, some students may, so this is the other thing to it. You got to be careful too, because it doesn't just stop there. It doesn't just stop with that group too, right? They start looking at everybody's social media, then they start looking at everybody's social media, right? And then it's so as when it says one size doesn't fit all, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that getting back to the original question is, if there's evidence that the University of Maryland was put on notice and they should have known, I think that's what we're getting into, then obviously there's a problem. And if there's certainly a problem that they could have prevented this tragedy from occurring, and they have a duty and a responsibility to the student bodies who they trust them to keep people safe and to give them a good quality education. So, as in law, and I'm sure President Karim will tell you, his attorneys will go back and forth, but I think that it's worth looking into as to what responsibility does a university have, and to what extent should we give them the power to also. I mean, that's also something that something can be debated, is now how much power, because the General Assembly, as we spoke, can do a lot of things, and part of it is, or the University of Maryland system can say, from now on, we want the college and universities to start looking at social media and keep track of this stuff, or to start reporting. I think reporting is always good. It always keeps people more honest. It's not the silver bullet, but if there's evidence that people are making threats, or we know that, hey, whether there's a hate group that's organizing on campus, off campus, and it's made up of a student body, that's where I think the state's attorney's office can get involved, is to say, look, something's wrong here, and we need to start investigating this to prevent people from being hurt, or even worse, being murdered.
So I know it's 9:20 and our class is supposed to end at 8:50, so I want to thank the students who stayed to listen. Do you all have any more questions for Senator Ramirez? Senator Ramirez, do you have these closing statements?
Just say thank you so much. It's very interesting times. It's very hard times right now in the United States. Still to this day in 2017, almost 2018, where we see racial inequality, where we see racism still very real, and to a certain extent, much more real than it was a few years ago, where people feel bullied. I would say that please take care of yourself, be aware of your surroundings, and report things. As you report things, in that way, I think it will help prevent things. Because as we spoke, if you report things, if you see things and you report them, and there's a paper trail to them, now the schools, now agencies, now people are held accountable. But if you don't report them and there aren't any paper trails, people say, well, we didn't know, right? At least, and nowadays people are much more conscious, okay, this is put on notice. And I'll give you a quick example. Unfortunately, it's another tragedy. It deals with our public schools, with the child abuse stuff, right? good thing that there's some paper trail to it, because now that, you know, people can say, well, we didn't know, right? Now there's some paper trail that's saying, you know, you did know and you should have done something about it, which is kind of where, whether the school knew that there was, you know, a person abusing kids and children, and they failed to do something. And that's, you know, that's unfortunate and so unfortunate as well. So just remember, hey, be involved, and if you don't like something, get up, change it, right? That's what America's about. It's not easy. I'm not going to tell you that it's easy to make change, but you need to express your voice. You need to be, you know, and do your homework on it too, right? So thank you so much. Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
You guys can feel free to get his business card and that of his chief of staff over here, and thank